My parents called me while I was driving to the airport and said, "Don't come for Thanksgiving. Your daughter is embarrassing." My 6-year-old was sitting right behind me in her car seat, her little pink backpack at her feet, and she heard every single word. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I made a decision that permanently changed my family, and looking back now, I realized that phone call wasn't the beginning of our story. It was the end of something that had been dying for years. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and this is the story of the day I chose my daughter over blood. Before we go any further, I need to ask you for something. If you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My mother said I wouldn't even reach 1,000 subscribers, but I believe stories like this deserve to be heard. Help me show her that these tales matter. Please subscribe to Olive Revenge Stories, and let's keep breathing life into stories that were never meant to stay silent. Now, let's continue. The freeway stretched out in front of me like a gray ribbon, endless and empty. It was Tuesday afternoon, the week before Thanksgiving, and I'd been looking forward to this drive for months. Not because I was excited to see my family. If I'm being honest, I hadn't been excited about that in years, but because I was excited for Ivy. That was my daughter's name. Ivy Rose Mitchell. She'd been talking about seeing her grandparents since September. She'd made them drawings. She'd practiced saying things to impress them. She'd picked out a special dress from Target, a deep green velvet thing that cost more than I usually spent on her, but I'd bought it anyway because she asked so sweetly and because I wanted her to feel like she mattered. I wanted her to feel loved. That's what mothers do, isn't it? We try to create moments where our children feel like they belong to something bigger than themselves, where family means safety and acceptance and unconditional love. I thought I was doing that by driving 8 hours through traffic and bad weather to get to my parents' house in Connecticut. I thought I was teaching her about loyalty and tradition and roots. I was teaching her something else entirely, and I just didn't know it yet. The call came through the Bluetooth system while I was merging onto 95. My mother's voice filled the car, crisp and controlled, the way it always was when she was about to say something she'd rehearsed. I could picture her sitting at the kitchen island, my father probably standing somewhere nearby, maybe nodding in agreement to whatever script they'd decided on together. "Sarah, we need to talk about your Thanksgiving plans," she said. I remember thinking that was an odd way to start. My plans were already made. I had the time off work. I'd packed the car. My daughter was in the back seat with her coloring books and her car snacks, waiting to see the house where her mother grew up, waiting to run through the yard where my mother still grew tomatoes and roses, waiting to be part of something family-shaped. "Okay," I said, keeping my voice light. "Is everything all right?" There was a pause. The kind of pause that tells you everything isn't all right, that something has shifted in the world, and you're about to find out what it is. "We think it would be better if you didn't come this year," my mother said. "Better for who?" I asked. I could feel my hands tightening on the steering wheel. Ivy was humming behind me, some song she'd learned at school, oblivious to the fact that her world was about to reshape itself. "Your sister has invited some colleagues from work. It's going to be more formal this year, more sophisticated. And frankly, Ivy is still at that age where she's quite." My mother paused, searching for the word, and somehow that made it worse, that she was choosing words carefully, that she was treating this rejection like it was a delicate thing. "Difficult. She's loud. She gets overexcited. Your sister feels like she wouldn't fit in with the aesthetic of what she's trying to create." I remember the word hitting me like a fist. Aesthetic. My daughter was 6 years old, and she was being rejected from her grandmother's house because she didn't fit the aesthetic. She was 6 and already learning that her existence could be inconvenient, that her joy was too big, that she needed to be smaller to be acceptable. "She's a child," I said quietly. I was trying to keep my voice level, but I could hear the shake in it, the anger and hurt and disbelief all tangled together. "She's 6 years old." "Exactly," my mother said. "She's at a difficult age. Perhaps when she's older. Perhaps when you've worked on her behavior and her." "Her what?" I interrupted. "My sister's right," my mother continued, ignoring my question. "It would be a scene. We'd all be uncomfortable. It's better this way. For everyone." And then, as if this wasn't already bad enough, she added the line that I will remember until the day I die. Your daughter is embarrassing. I didn't respond immediately. I couldn't. The words were too big and too wrong, and they were floating in the car now, poisoning the air, contaminating the space where my daughter was humming and coloring and trusting that the world was a safe place. Behind me, Ivy's humming stopped. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw her sitting perfectly still, her hands frozen over her coloring book, her eyes focused on something far away. Did she hear that? My mother asked. I couldn't speak. Sarah, did she hear? I ended the call. Just disconnected it. I didn't say goodbye or have a conversation about it or give her a chance to backtrack or pretend it was all a misunderstanding. I just pressed the button and made her voice disappear. My heart was hammering in my chest, and I was trying very hard to keep the car on the road because my vision was doing something strange, getting sort of tunneled and tight. Mommy? Ivy's voice was small from the back seat. Yeah, baby. I'm here. Did Grandma say I was embarrassing? The question was so quiet, I almost didn't hear it over the sound of the highway. I pulled off at the next exit. I don't even remember which one it was. I just knew I couldn't drive anymore, that I couldn't pretend everything was fine while something in my child's eyes was breaking apart. I pulled into a rest stop parking lot and turned the car off, and then I turned around to look at my daughter, really look at her, at her 6-year-old face, trying to process something that no 6-year-old should ever have to process. No, I said firmly. You are not embarrassing. Grandma said something very mean and very wrong, and it's not about you. It's about her and the way she sees the world, and the fact that she doesn't know how to love people the way they are. But you are not embarrassing. You are bright and loud and beautiful and funny, and you take up exactly as much space as you're supposed to take up, and anyone who tells you otherwise is lying. Ivy's lips started to tremble, and I unbuckled my seatbelt and climbed into the back seat with her, holding her in my lap the way I did when she was smaller, before she got too big to fit there comfortably. We sat like that for a long time while cars rushed past on the highway and the rest stop hummed with the sound of other people's lives happening around us. And that's when I made the decision. That's when I turned the car around. It took me 40 minutes to retrace my route and head back south. It took me 40 minutes of clarity that I'd never had before, clarity that came from watching my daughter's face crumple and understanding that some lines, once you cross them, you don't go back over. I called my mother back from a parking lot while Ivy sat in the car with her window down, eating a pretzel rod. If you don't want us there, that's fine, I said. No preamble. No rage. Just fact. But I need you to understand something. My daughter is 6 years old. She deserved to go to her grandmother's house and be loved. She deserved to be welcomed. She deserved to feel like she was part of this family, not some inconvenience you had to manage around your sophisticated guests. And because she didn't get that, because you chose your reputation and your control and your idea of perfection over your actual granddaughter, you're going to lose both of us. Not just for this Thanksgiving, not just for this year, but for good. My mother tried to respond, but I was already continuing. Ivy heard what you said. She understood that her grandmother thinks she's embarrassing. And now she understands that family can hurt you. You taught her that. You and Dad and my sister. So thank you for that lesson, because it clarified something for me that I've been struggling with for a long time. My job isn't to manage my daughter's existence to make you more comfortable. My job is to protect her from people who would do exactly what you just did. I hung up before she could respond. I didn't wait for her to cry or apologize or say that I'd misunderstood or that she was joking. I just disconnected. It's strange how quickly a family can reorganize itself when you remove one of the key structures. My mother called back 6 times in the next hour. My father called 4 times. My sister sent a text message that said, "You're being dramatic," which somehow hurt worse than my mother's cruelty because it was dismissive, like my decision to protect my daughter was just another one of my emotional overreactions, just another Sarah being too sensitive again. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I drove back home to my apartment in New York, back to the place where it was just me and Ivy, where we made our own traditions and our own rules, and where I could control the environment enough to keep her safe. We stopped at a diner on the way, and Ivy had chocolate chip pancakes for dinner, and I let her, because who was I kidding anymore? There were no rules anymore. There was just me and my child, and the understanding that we had to take care of each other now in a way we hadn't before. The next few days are a blur in my memory. I remember calling my boss and asking if I could take an emergency week off. I remember cleaning the apartment obsessively, as if I could scrub away the hurt through sheer force. I remember lying in bed at night and wondering if I'd made a mistake, if I was being too harsh, if I should just call back and apologize and pretend that none of it had happened. But then I'd remember Ivy's face in the car, that moment when her humming stopped, that second when she understood that she wasn't safe even with her own blood, and I'd get back out of bed and keep moving forward. Ivy asked about the canceled trip once. We were at the grocery store, and she saw someone buying ingredients for a big meal, and she asked me why we weren't going to Connecticut anymore. I knelt down to her level, and I told her the truth, but in the way you tell truths to 6-year-olds, simple and honest, and not cruel. I told her that sometimes people we love make choices that hurt us. I told her that when that happens, we get to decide whether we want to keep spending time around them. I told her that she was never the problem. I told her that my job was to love her and protect her and make sure she knew her own worth. And I told her that I was sorry her grandmother didn't know how to do those things, but that didn't make anything wrong with her. It took me 40 minutes to retrace my route and head back south. It took me 40 minutes of clarity that I'd never had before, clarity that came from watching my daughter's face crumple and understanding that some lines, once you cross them, you don't go back over. I called my mother back from a parking lot while Ivy sat in the car with her window down, eating a pretzel rod. "If you don't want us there, that's fine," I said. No preamble. No rage. Just fact. But I need you to understand something. My daughter is 6 years old. She deserved to go to her grandmother's house and be loved. She deserved to be welcomed. She deserved to feel like she was part of this family, not some inconvenience you had to manage around your sophisticated guests. And because she didn't get that, because you chose your reputation and your control and your idea of perfection over your actual granddaughter, you're going to lose both of us. Not just for this Thanksgiving. Not just for this year. But for good. My mother tried to respond, but I was already continuing. Ivy heard what you said. She understood that her grandmother thinks she's embarrassing. And now she understands that family can hurt you. You taught her that. You and Dad and my sister. So thank you for that lesson, because it clarified something for me that I've been struggling with for a long time. My job isn't to manage my daughter's existence to make you more comfortable. My job is to protect her from people who would do exactly what you just did. I hung up before she could respond. I didn't wait for her to cry or apologize or say that I'd misunderstood or that she was joking. I just disconnected. It's strange how quickly a family can reorganize itself when you remove one of the key structures. My mother called back 6 times in the next hour. My father called 4 times. My sister sent a text message that said, "You're being dramatic," which somehow hurt worse than my mother's cruelty because it was dismissive, like my decision to protect my daughter was just another one of my emotional overreactions, just another Sarah being too sensitive again. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I drove back home to my apartment in New York, back to the place where it was just me and Ivy, where we made our own traditions and our own rules, and where I could control the environment enough to keep her safe. We stopped at a diner on the way, and Ivy had chocolate chip pancakes for dinner, and I let her because who was I kidding anymore? There were no rules anymore. There was just me and my child, and the understanding that we had to take care of each other now in a way we hadn't before. The next few days are a blur in my memory. I remember calling my boss and asking if I could take an emergency week off. I remember cleaning the apartment obsessively, as if I could scrub away the hurt through sheer force. I remember lying in bed at night and wondering if I'd made a mistake, if I was being too harsh, if I should just call back and apologize and pretend that none of it had happened. But then I'd remember Ivy's face in the car, that moment when her humming stopped, that second when she understood that she wasn't safe even with her own blood, and I'd get back out of bed and keep moving forward. Ivy asked about the canceled trip once. We were at the grocery store, and she saw someone buying ingredients for a big meal, and she asked me why we weren't going to Connecticut anymore. I knelt down to her level, and I told her the truth. But in the way you tell truths to 6-year-olds, simple and honest and not cruel. I told her that sometimes people we love make choices that hurt us. I told her that when that happens, We get to decide whether we want to keep spending time around them. I told her that she was never the problem. I told her that my job was to love her and protect her and make sure she knew her own worth. And I told her that I was sorry her grandmother didn't know how to do those things, but that didn't make anything wrong with her. That Wednesday, while my family was probably setting the table in Connecticut, getting ready for whatever sophisticated gathering they'd planned, Ivy and I were at a diner on the corner of our street. It was called Murphy's, and it had been there since before I was born, one of those places with red vinyl booths and a jukebox and a waitress named Carol who'd been working there for 30 years. Carol knew Ivy because we went there sometimes on Sunday mornings, and Ivy loved Carol the way children love people who make them feel welcome. Carol was in her 70s, with gray hair cut short and practical, and she had 3 grandchildren who she talked about constantly. She had this way of making Ivy feel like she was the most important person in the world. That day, when we walked in, Carol took one look at me and seemed to understand that something had shifted. She didn't ask questions. She just seated us in our favorite booth and brought Ivy some chocolate milk without her having to ask for it. "We're going to have pie," Carol announced. "I made apple today." "The good kind?" Ivy asked. She was testing it, this idea of asking for things, this idea that maybe the world would give them to her if she was brave enough to ask. "The only kind there is, sweetheart," Carol said. And then she looked at me, and something in her eyes was knowing. Something in her eyes said that she understood, that something was broken, and that we were here to stitch it back together, and that food and kindness and presence were going to be the needle and thread. We stayed at that diner for 4 hours that afternoon. Carol brought pie, and then she brought coffee, and then she brought more pie, and Ivy sat across from me, and we played the jukebox, and we made lists of things we were grateful for. And Carol kept checking in on us, kept treating us like we were the ones she'd chosen to invest in, and I had this realization that was both comforting and terrifying. My family of origin wasn't my real family. My family was Carol and my daughter, and the people who showed up when I needed them, not out of obligation but out of genuine care. Thanksgiving that year was something I'll remember for the rest of my life, but not for the reasons I'd imagined. It wasn't about gathering around a table with people who shared my DNA. It was about understanding that family is a choice, and that the people we choose often matter more than the people we're born to. The next few months were harder than I expected. Not in the immediate aftermath, that was actually almost peaceful. But around Christmas time, when the silence started to feel less like liberation and more like loss, even though I knew my decision was the right one. My parents tried different approaches. My father called and used his serious voice, the one he saved for important conversations. "Your mother is suffering," he said. "She doesn't understand why you're being so stubborn about this." I wanted to scream that my mother's suffering was her own responsibility, that she'd made the choice to reject her granddaughter, that I shouldn't have to take on the emotional burden of managing her feelings about the consequences of her own actions. Instead, I just said, "I'm sorry she's suffering, but my daughter's well-being is not negotiable." He hung up after that, and there was a sad quality to it, like he was finally understanding that this wasn't going to be fixed with apology or time, or the kind of reconciliation where everyone pretends nothing happened. My sister sent Christmas gifts. Expensive ones. A gaming tablet, a gift card to Target, a scooter that I didn't even want to let Ivy keep because accepting gifts felt like accepting the narrative that everything could be fixed with money and gesture and performance. But Ivy was 6 and she didn't understand the politics of rejection and compensation, so I let her open them and I let her be happy, and I hated my sister a little bit for making me feel like the bad guy for protecting my child. By January, I decided to do something that probably sounds insane to a lot of people. I decided to start a YouTube channel. Not because I wanted to get famous or make money or become some kind of cautionary tale for people to judge. I started it because I needed to process something that had broken inside me, and because I was watching my daughter recover from emotional trauma, and I realized that there were probably thousands of other women out there doing the same thing with their own children, hiding the fact that their families had failed them, pretending that blood meant something when it obviously didn't. I called the channel Olive Revenge Stories. I don't actually know why I chose that name. I think maybe because there's something about olives, they're bitter and they're preserved, and they're somehow perfect exactly the way they are. And I think maybe because I was angry. Not at Ivy. Not at myself. but at a system that makes women feel like they owe their families endless patience and forgiveness and acceptance, even when those families are causing active harm. The first video took me 3 weeks to record. I was terrified. I kept thinking about my parents finding it, about my sister sending it to people, about being labeled as the woman who aired her family's dirty laundry on the internet. But then I thought about Ivy, about her sitting in that car, and understanding that the world could reject her, and I just started talking. I told the story exactly the way it happened. I didn't soften it or excuse my family or pretend that I was the villain in some narrative where they were the wrong parties. I told the truth. And I uploaded it on a Sunday night with shaking hands and the volume turned down low so that Ivy wouldn't wake up and find me crying at the kitchen table. That first week, I got maybe 200 views. Most of them were probably people I knew, people who'd shared the link out of curiosity or loyalty, or the same kind of need to process family trauma that I had. The comments were supportive, but quiet. Women leaving messages like, "Thank you for saying this," and "I needed to hear that," and "My mother said something similar, and I've never known how to talk about it." But then something unexpected happened. Somehow, maybe through the algorithm, maybe through shares, the video started reaching people I didn't know. And those people started leaving comments too. They started telling their own stories. They started saying that they'd also chosen their children over their parents, that they'd also set boundaries that felt impossible, that they'd also wondered if they were being too harsh or too sensitive or too much. And all of those women were still here. All of them had survived it. The guilt had faded for some of them. The anger had transformed for others. But they were all still here, and their children were okay, and that seemed like the most important metric of success that existed. Within 2 months, I had 10,000 subscribers. My mother did not say that I wouldn't reach 1,000, as it turned out. My mother didn't say much of anything at all. She sent an email that I didn't open for a week, and when I finally did, it just said, "I'm sorry. I don't understand what I did wrong, but I'm sorry that you're hurt." It wasn't the apology I wanted. It wasn't even really an apology. It was a defense in the form of a question that I don't understand what I did wrong, implying that maybe I was the one overreacting, maybe I was the one who'd misinterpreted a simple statement about my daughter's behavior. It was an apology that required me to do the emotional work of making her feel better about having hurt me, and I wasn't willing to do that anymore. I didn't respond. I deleted the email from my inbox, and then I deleted it from my trash, and then I went about my business of being a mother and a creator and a woman who is learning, slowly, that some people didn't deserve to be in my life just because they'd been in my life first. Ivy turned 7. Then 8. Years started to blur together in the way they do when you're building something new and you're also raising a child, and you're also trying to heal from something that fundamentally changed the way you understand love and loyalty and obligation. The channel grew. It went from 10,000 subscribers to 50,000 to 100,000. Women sent me messages asking if I could tell their stories. They sent me their own videos, their own accounts of family betrayal and boundary setting, and the complicated process of learning to choose themselves. I started featuring their stories on the channel. I created a community where women could talk about the things that were too shameful to say out loud, the ways their families had failed them, the decisions they'd made to protect their children or themselves or both. And somehow, all of that vulnerability became a kind of power. Meanwhile, my relationship with my parents remained unchanged. They didn't call. I didn't call. My sister sent a birthday gift for Ivy every year, which I accepted and which Ivy enjoyed, but there was no relationship there, no conversation, no bridge being built. It was a transaction. It was money as apology, as if money could undo the damage that had been done. And maybe I was being harsh. Maybe I was holding a grudge. But I looked at my daughter, who was growing up smart and kind and funny, who was loud and enthusiastic and exactly herself, and I couldn't regret the decision I'd made. On Ivy's 10th birthday, my mother called. It was the first time I'd heard her voice in almost 4 years. I almost didn't answer, but something in me needed to hear what she might have to say. "Hello," I said. "Sarah." She sounded older. Or maybe that's just how sadness sounds when it's been festering for that long. "I want to see her." For a second, I didn't even know who she was talking about. And then I did. "I want to see Ivy. I made a mistake. I was awful and I was wrong, and I've had 4 years to think about it, and I know that now. I'd like the opportunity to try again. I should have felt something. I should have felt triumph or vindication or even forgiveness. But mostly what I felt was tired. I felt like I was being asked to do all the emotional work again, to open a door that I'd spent 4 years building walls around, to put my daughter back in a position where she might be hurt by someone who'd already hurt her once. No, I said simply. I don't think so. Sarah, you told my 6-year-old daughter that she was embarrassing. You prioritized your reputation over your relationship with her. You had 4 years to reach out, to apologize, to do the work of rebuilding. Instead, you sent birthday gifts and pretended that money was a substitute for presents. And now that you've decided you want a relationship, you expect me to just open that door for you. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. She's my granddaughter. She's also my daughter. And my job is to protect her. I'm not willing to put her through the process of getting to know someone who might reject her again the next time she's inconvenient. I won't reject her again, my mother said. I promise. And maybe I was being cruel, but I said it anyway. You also promised to love her unconditionally when she was born. You also said she'd be welcome in our family. I don't trust your promises anymore. I hung up after that. She didn't call again. My father sent a letter a few months later, one of those physical letters that felt both sincere and anachronistic in equal measure. He said that he understood why I'd made the choice I had. He said that he'd been angry at me for a long time for keeping Ivy away from them, but that he'd come to understand that I was just being a mother and that he respected that, even though it hurt. He said he was sorry for not standing up to my mother, for not fighting for us when I needed him to. It was a better letter than I'd expected. It was an actual apology, not a defense, not a question wrapped up in remorse. It was genuine. And I cried when I read it, not because I wanted to reconcile, but because I grieved the father who should have written that letter 4 years earlier, the father who should have defended his granddaughter, the father who should have been brave enough to choose us when it mattered most. I wrote him back, eventually. I told him that I forgave him because I did, and that I appreciated his letter because I did. But I also told him that I wasn't ready for Ivy to have a relationship with them, and that maybe if she wanted one when she was older, that would be her choice to make. I told him that he was welcome to reach out to her directly when she was 18 if he wanted to, and that if she wanted a relationship then, I wouldn't stand in the way. But until then, my job was to make sure she felt safe, and that meant keeping boundaries that probably looked cruel from the outside. The years after that were interesting in a way I didn't expect. The channel grew. I grew. Ivy grew. We built a life together that was shaped by our own choices, our own values, our own understanding of what family meant. We didn't have grandparents, but we had Carol from the diner. We had my best friend Jennifer, who came over every Sunday and taught Ivy how to cook. We had my colleague Marcus, who showed up for every school play and every soccer game and treated Ivy like she was his own kid. We had chosen family, and it was real, and it mattered. I dated a little bit. I had relationships that didn't work out and relationships that lasted a few years and eventually, a relationship with a man named David who understood my story and who treated Ivy like she was the most important thing in the world, and who meant it. We got married when Ivy was 12, and I remember standing at the altar and looking out at the people who were there, our chosen family, our community, our people, and feeling this deep sense of rightness that I'd never felt in my parents' house. By the time Ivy was 13, all of Revenge Stories had 500,000 subscribers. I'd been approached by agents and managers and people who wanted to turn the channel into something bigger, something more profitable. But I kept it small. I kept it intimate. I kept it about real stories from real women who'd made the hardest decision of their lives. And the response was always the same: gratitude, relief, the sense that they weren't alone, that their decisions to protect their children were valid, that their pain meant something. My parents lived the kind of life I imagine most estranged parents live. They had their grandchildren through my sister, who'd given them 3 kids and who'd maintained the family structure that I'd blown up. They had a life that looked normal from the outside. My mother joined the library board. My father retired and started playing golf. They probably told people that they had a difficult daughter who'd cut them out, and people probably sympathized with them, the way people do, without knowing the full story. And maybe they felt pain. Probably they did. Estrangement is a kind of death, and they were mourning, in their way, the family they thought they'd have. But I couldn't feel sorry for them. Not really. Because I kept coming back to that moment in the car, to Ivy's humming stopping, to the second when she understood that she wasn't safe. And I thought, that was the choice. That moment, when they chose their image over her, that was where everything broke. And I didn't break it. They did. On Ivy's 18th birthday, my mother sent a letter. It was thick and heavy, filled with pages and pages of handwriting, and for a second I considered not giving it to her. Ivy was old enough now to make her own decisions, but the protective instinct in me wanted to shield her from whatever guilt or manipulation my mother had written out. But she was 18 and she was my daughter, but she was also her own person, and she deserved to know what her grandmother wanted to say. So I gave it to her, and I told her that she didn't have to read it if she didn't want to, and that whatever she decided, I would support. She took the letter to her room, and I didn't ask her what it said. But I heard her crying, and I sat outside her door for a long time, wanting to go in but also respecting that this was her own journey, her own decision to make. When she came out, her face was red, and her eyes were swollen. "She wants to meet me," Ivy said. "She says she made mistakes when I was younger, and she wants to know who I've become." I waited for her to ask me what she should do. But she didn't. She already knew. And after about a week of thinking about it, she decided to write her back. I didn't read that letter either. But I watched my daughter sit at the kitchen table and write her own words to a woman she barely remembered, and I felt something shift in the world. It wasn't forgiveness, exactly. Not on my part. I still felt the same way about my mother. But it was recognition that my daughter was her own person now, and that she got to decide what her grandmother meant in her life. That was her choice to make, not mine. They met at a coffee shop. Ivy went alone and I stayed home and didn't pace and didn't worry and didn't try to control the outcome, which was maybe the hardest thing I'd done since I turned the car around. Ivy came home a few hours later and told me it was okay. She said her grandmother apologized. She said she cried. She said they talked about what happened when Ivy was 6, and my mother explained the pressure she'd felt from her own mother, the perfectionism that had been instilled in her since childhood, the way she'd passed that on to my sister, and to me. She said Ivy's existence had threatened that entire structure, and instead of being brave enough to change the structure, my mother had tried to fit Ivy into it, and when Ivy couldn't be squeezed into the shape she wanted, she'd pushed her away. "Did you believe her?" I asked. "I don't know," Ivy said. "But I think she believes what she's saying. I think that's the best she could do with the information she had." And I looked at my daughter, who was 18 and wise in a way that I wouldn't have been at her age, and I thought, I did that. I raised a girl who could extend compassion even to people who'd hurt her, because I showed her that you could love yourself and set boundaries at the same time. I showed her that protecting yourself wasn't selfish. I showed her that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was walk away. And now she was using those tools to decide what kind of relationship she wanted, and she wasn't coming to me with questions or guilt or trying to navigate between her loyalty to me and her curiosity about her grandmother. She was just being herself, making her own decisions, carrying her own story forward. Over the next year, Ivy slowly built a relationship with my parents. It was careful and it was bounded, and it wasn't the kind of relationship she would have had if they'd chosen her from the beginning. But it was real, and it was on her terms, and I respected that. I didn't try to poison it or protect her from it. I just made it clear that I was here if she needed to talk about it, if it got painful, if she needed to set her own boundaries. And mostly it was fine. They loved her now because she was 18 and she was accomplished and she was kind, and because maybe they'd finally learned the lesson that had broken our family, that children aren't projects or aesthetic choices or reputation management. They're just people, and they deserve to be loved exactly as they are. As for me, I never reconciled with my parents. I was pleasant when I had to be, which wasn't often. I showed up to my father's 75th birthday party, and I made conversation, and I left early. I sent my mother a Christmas gift every year, even though she didn't send me anything. I existed in a state of polite distance that felt sustainable, that felt like it honored my own boundaries while still allowing my adult daughter to have a relationship with her grandparents. It wasn't warm. It wasn't close. But it was honest. And that was enough. The channel kept growing. 1 million subscribers. 2 million. I started getting recognized in coffee shops sometimes, women coming up to me and saying thank you, saying that my videos had helped them make the decision to set boundaries with their own families, that watching me protect Ivy had given them permission to protect themselves. And every time it happened, I felt this deep sense of responsibility, this awareness that my pain had become someone else's permission slip. And I was grateful for that, grateful that something so hard had turned into something that helped other people. But I was also aware that the work would never be finished, that there would always be women struggling with the same decision I'd had to make, and that maybe that was okay. Maybe the point wasn't to solve the problem, but to witness it, to validate it, to say out loud that yes, your family failed you, and that doesn't mean you're broken. It means they were broken. And now you get to decide what you want to build instead. I think about that moment in the car sometimes, the moment when everything changed. I think about what would have happened if I'd just kept driving, if I'd arrived at my parents' house and pretended nothing was wrong, if I'd smiled and held my daughter close and taught her that it was fine to accept rejection as long as it came from people you loved. Would our lives have been easier? Maybe. Probably. But they would have been smaller too. They would have been shaped by fear and obligation and the impossible task of trying to be acceptable to people who'd already decided you weren't. Instead, I chose something different. I chose to protect my daughter. I chose to set boundaries that felt impossible. I chose to build a new definition of family, one that was smaller but deeper, weaker in numbers but stronger in intention. And every day, I wake up grateful for that choice. Because my daughter knows her own worth. Because she loves herself and other people without needing to erase herself to do it. Because she's learned that family is something you choose, something you build, something that requires showing up and being honest, and doing the work of actually loving people, not just performing familyness. That's what I gave her by turning the car around. And that's something my parents could never have given her, no matter how many Thanksgivings we'd spent in Connecticut.